This is Doug DeMuro, and it's time for the big one, the Doug Awards, the annual award tradition where I give out awards to cars I've reviewed this year. This is a tradition going back now 8 years, back to 2017. This is our 8th year. I do all these awards. We're gonna do it this year. Let's go. Okay, the annual Doug Awards. It's usually a pretty long video. I'm not going to spend too much time introducing it. Basically, I give awards. Here's how this is going to work. I'm going to tell you the category, and then we're going to show on the screen the cars that have won this award in the last few years, going back to 2017. Then I'm going to tell you the runner-up and then the winner this year. So let's get started with the Doug is the Type of Guy Award. Now, this award is given to the most Doug-ish car that I reviewed. Not necessarily the quirkiest or the weirdest, but the most like Doug, the car that I wanted to review clearly, and I didn't know or care if the audience was going to get into it. I just really wanted to check out that car. The Doug is the Type of Guy Award. The runner-up for this award is the Dodge Durango SP360, the supercharged Shelby-tuned Dodge Durango with racing stripes and racing seats front and rear. But the winner for the Doug is the Type of Guy Award in 2024, the Oldsmobile Bravada. I reviewed a first-generation Oldsmobile Bravada this year. It got actually okay views, but most people had no idea what it was or that it ever existed, or really they didn't care that it existed. But I have always wanted to review a nice early Bravada, and I did! And it was absolutely lovely with CRT screens for the gauge cluster that functioned perfectly in that car, but were not designed well. It was just a magic experience for me. Giant panel gaps, red on red, the original Oldsmobile Bravada, one of the original personal luxury SUVs, honestly, but it just was not executed all that well. And it was amazing to get in there and do that. And that is truly a Doug is the Type of Guy sort of vehicle, the kind of car that only I would appreciate and only I would think to make a video on, which was reflected again in the view count for that video. Okay, next up, this is the only objective award in the annual Doug Awards, the most expensive car I reviewed this year. Quite simply defined as the car that I reviewed this year that is worth the most money. It doesn't have the highest base price when it was new, but is worth the most money now. And I've reviewed some very expensive cars over the years that have won this award, and this year was no different. The runner-up for the most expensive car was the Pininfarina Battista, which is like a $2.5 million fully electric hypercar. The winner, though, for the most expensive car I reviewed this year, the Aston Martin Valkyrie, the crazy Aston Martin hypercar. That's worth like $4.5 million, $4 to $5 million, depending on options in the market. An absolutely crazy number and a totally crazy and insane car. Truly a very, very special vehicle. And it was, by a pretty wide margin, the most expensive car I reviewed this year. And in fact, if you go back and look through previous most expensive car awards, it's one of the most expensive cars I have ever reviewed. The only ones that are higher, McLaren F1, maybe the Koenigsegg Agera RS1. This was one of the most expensive cars I have ever driven, which was very nerve-wracking, but we got through it and we made a good video. Next up is the Bargain of the Year Award. You can see previous winners here. This goes to the car that is the best value, the car that, for the price delivers the best experience. And I think in past years there have been some really great bargain price cars that you can get for, sometimes it's actually pretty big money, but what they deliver is even bigger thrills and impressiveness and capability. This year, the runner-up for the Bargain of the Year, the Ferrari 550 Maranello. I absolutely adore this car. I think 550 Maranellos are total bargains in the low $100,000 price range for kind of mild-up driven ones, which is what you want. You want a driver so you can drive it. This car is rare, low production volume, and I think the value should be considerably higher than they are. The market is not there yet, but right now I consider that car to be a big, big value. However, the winner for Bargain of the Year this year goes to the 2007 Aston Martin V8 Vantage that I reviewed very much earlier in the year. This car is just such a deal. These routinely sell in the $30,000 to $40,000 range. They're beautiful cars, the Vantage. It's a gorgeous design. And I owned one, and it was a bargain when I owned it, and they haven't really gotten a lot more expensive since then. They provide an exotic car driving experience. They are surprisingly fun. They are surprisingly fast. They are surprisingly exciting cars for the money. It's the same money as like a 997 Porsche 911, but instead you have an exotic, crazy, exciting Aston Martin, and that is a truly special car for the $30,000 to $40,000 price range. Easy choice for bargain of the year. Okay, next award is the biggest surprise of the year. So, I am an objective car reviewer. I've reviewed thousands of automobiles, and yet when I approach a car review, I still have a pretty preconceived notion of how the car is going to be, how it's going to drive. However, I am still surprised occasionally by cars. And this year, there were several big surprises, but let's go through the top two. Runner-up for biggest surprise of the year is the VinFast VF8, believe it or not. This was not an interesting car, it was not a special car, it was not a great car. However, the early reviews of the VinFast VF8 were that it was the worst new car anybody had ever seen or been in or been around. Now, I did not review an early VinFast. I reviewed a later one when they made some changes and updates based on the criticism they got in those early reviews. And honestly, I drove the car and it was fine. It was a boring electric luxury, near luxury crossover. And given the price points these VinFasts are now offered leasing for, I've seen $199 a month with nothing down. That's like cell phone bill territory. And even though the early reviews were really negative, I found the updated car to be fine. Not great, but totally fine. I was expecting it would be horrible. It was not. And if you're not into cars at all and you don't care and you want something cheap to putz around, it's not so bad. But the biggest surprise of the year, the winner for biggest surprise of the year, to me, by far this year, was the new Porsche 911 ST. This may surprise people who are into Porsches. Like, how did that car surprise you? Of course it's great. But I gotta tell you something, I'm not a Porsche guy, I would just put it that. I have the Carrera GT, I love that car. I don't consider myself to be a Porsche guy. I like the 911, I feel that it's gotten too big, too wide, too heavy, too luxurious. I'm not really I like the older ones. And so I get in the 911 ST, and I don't expect Porsches anymore to really wow me from a personal level. Like, I like the older ones. Like, I like the 996 GT2, 02. I like my Carrera GT, 05. I like the 993 Turbo, 97, right? Cars from 20 years ago. And I drive this thing, and I'm like, wow. This is one of the greatest Porsches I have ever driven, and it's brand new. And I gotta tell you, I'm not saying that about Ferrari. I'm not saying that about McLaren, Lamborghini. Like, all of their new cars are cool and fast, but they're all kind of point and shoot cars. They're not that special. The 911 ST feels every bit as special as the 993 Turbo and the 993 GT2 and 993 Carrera RS and all those cars from the old days that we all think are so cool and so special. The 911 ST, the new 911 ST is like that. And it's amazing in a world where so many people are all in agreement that the cool stuff is behind us, is in the rearview mirror, is in the history, to drive a car that feels like one of the cool stuff. And 911 ST truly, a big surprise for me. It woke up the 911 chassis in a way I wasn't expecting, and it's just such an amazingly, immensely exciting and fun car. Honestly, I wish I could get one. Okay, next up, the worst car of the year. The worst car of the year. This goes to the worst car that I've reviewed this year. Now, in a minute, we'll do the Car of the Year award, the best car of the year. I only will give that award to a new car. But worst car of the year can go to any car, new, old. And you can see the previous winners have been some really bad cars, like the meter-made car, the Mitsubishi i-MiEV. We're talking really, really bad cars, which is why this year's Worst Car of the Year award is a bit of a surprise. Runner-up for Worst Car of the Year, the Maserati Gran Turismo. Overpriced, not great, just a very disappointing experience. And I'm seeing transaction prices on Gran Turismos already $50,000, $60,000 below sticker, which suggests that the market agrees with me. However, the worst car of the year, and I'm sorry to do this to our friends over at Mercedes-Benz, but the new Mercedes AMG C63 is the worst car that I drove this year. It's actually a very good car in a lot of ways. Dynamically, it's surprisingly good. The tech is great. I like how it looks. The interior is nice. The powertrain is just such a huge letdown that I'm surprised they did it. I'm honestly surprised that they were like, release this car out of Germany. And I'm already seeing massive lease deals, which is surprising because it's a brand new AMG, top range AMG car. The market doesn't like it any more than I do, and it's just disappointing. And again, I mentioned this in the video, but I'll reiterate, I was hoping to be the one car journalist who was contrarian and found the good part of this turbo 4-cylinder that they've switched to, and I just couldn't. I drove the car around for a week. I was immensely disappointed with it. and it was just really kind of a shame what they did with that car and how it ended up turning out. And so it wasn't an easy choice giving it the Worst Car of the Year award, especially because there are redeeming qualities. And I've had worst cars before where there were no redeeming qualities, like the Soviet car I reviewed, like the Mercedes-Benz Metris passenger van. There have been some really, the meter-made cars, some bad cars. The C63 is not that terrible, but it's terrible in the place that matters most to the people who buy it, the powertrain and the feel and the soul of the car. It seems like it's all been completely removed, and it's just a disappointment. Okay, next up, video of the year. That would be the most meaningful video that I did this year, the video that meant the most to me as, you know, Doug DeMuro, the YouTuber. And in the past, this had been stuff like videos that got huge views, or last year it was when I bought my Carrera GT. That was obviously a big deal. This is the one that like meant the most. So runner-up is the video where I sold my Land Rover Defender. For years, I've owned this yellow, old-school Land Rover Defender. It was my wedding getaway car. Took it to my honeymoon. You know, it was a very special like part of my family. My friends all rode on it, loved it. It was just a huge. It was a fun creator on a summer day at the beach. And I sold it this year for a lot of reasons, one of which was I just couldn't keep dealing. I did too many cars, too much going on. Also, it just wasn't safe enough for my family. But making that video was sad, knowing that that would kind of be the end of the Defender. However, the most meaningful winner video of this year was video review I did of the McLaren P1 this year. And that's particularly meaningful for me because that McLaren P1 was later auctioned on Cars and Bids, or it was auctioned to go along with the video. And Cars and Bids, you know, we launched this thing 4 years ago, and it was fledgling. It was this little thing that only had a couple of car auctions, and to get to only 4 years later auctioning off a McLaren P1 was a really big deal and a really meaningful moment for Cars and Bids and for me. And that was huge. That was just absolutely huge. To imagine Cars and Bids already at a place where we are auctioning vehicles like a McLaren P1 is just such a massive, massive big deal for me. And it was at the time, and I was absolutely thrilled that we were able to auction it. And there are hopefully many more crazy high dollar special cool cars on their way. Even the cars that we sell every single day, I couldn't have imagined even 2 years ago that we would have this type of cars on Cars and Bids. I'm amazed by how this business has sort of taken off and now kind of is doing its own thing. And that P1 is sort of a great example of that. And when you start a business and when you see it get to that level, that is very meaningful to you. And so that is my most meaningful video of the year. Next up, we're getting to the final two, the big two Doug Awards, and then we'll go through the top 10 Quirks, which are also very much worth sticking around for. But the final two Doug Awards, number one, the Quirkiest car of the year. Obviously, Quirkiest car of the year is the car that is the quirkiest. Not necessarily the individual quirk is cool, but like the overall car is just quirky and weird and interesting in a very quirky way. And so what is that? Of course, I always have a lot of competition for this, and this year it was hard to pick. But the runner-up for Quirkiest car of the year, the Nissan Figaro, which is a right-hand drive convertible, came in from Japan. It was absolutely bizarre. It was a 90s car that was intended to be a 90s Japanese compact car take on a 50s American car, which is almost a laughable concept. It's almost like the prompt in a comedy skit. And yet they did that, they made that, and they actually pulled it off pretty well, and it was just a ridiculous, quirky car that had quirks basically everywhere you could possibly imagine with it. However, unquestionably the quirkiest car of the year, it was not difficult to figure out the number one, the winner for this award. The quirkiest car of the year, the Tesla Cybertruck. Absolutely bizarre, insane vehicle. The whole thing is a rolling quirk. It is totally nuts, totally crazy, and the Cybertruck easily wins for Quirkiest Car of the Year. When you design a car with the express purpose of it being bizarre and weird and quirky, that is always going to do well in a Quirky Car of the Year award ceremony. So that's our quirkiest, and now we are on to our final award before we go to the top quirks of the year. Final award, which is the Car of the Year. And in the Car of the Year award, I do things a little differently. I'm going to give you the top 5 runners-up and then the winner. So I'm naming basically the top 6 cars for Car of the Year. And you can see the previous winners here. There have been some, again, this is only to new cars. The Car of the Year is only the best new car I have reviewed each year. And there have been some very special ones, obviously, on this list. These are, of course, some of the best cars that have come out in the last 7 or 8 years. And this year is no different. I got the chance to review a lot of great cars this year. So, Number 5 runner-up, the new BMW i5. This may surprise a lot of people because there's been a lot of criticism of the new 5 Series for getting bigger, and people don't think it looks good, but I drove that, it gave me that car for a week, and I was absolutely over the moon astonished by how that car drove. It is smooth, comfortable, fantastic. And I got to tell you, as a 5-time Mercedes-Benz E-Class owner, I would switch tomorrow to the i5 if I could get a station wagon version. I've had 3 E-Class station wagons. I have one now, a brand new one, and I would switch to an i5 Touring in a heartbeat. It was great technology, smooth, comfortable, nice car. I know people don't love how it looks. I disagree. I actually think it looks good. I'm just very impressed with the overall package of that car. For the first time ever, I think BMW kind of abandoned some of the dynamism of previous 5 Series models for the solidity and luxury of the E-Class. And I think they did it better, actually. I think it's an amazing car. Number 4 runner-up for Car of the Year, the new Volkswagen ID Buzz, which would have easily won this award if pricing hadn't come in where it did. ID Buzz is just cool. It's not going to be a hugely successful selling car, and Volkswagen basically admitted that to me when they were telling me about it. It's their halo car. It's the top-of-the-line cool thing that's going to get people into dealerships and make people happy with Volkswagen again. It's the goodwill car, and it's amazing, and I think it's incredibly cool looking. There are a couple of little flaws with it, like the lack of cup holders in the second row. There's some other little stuff that I would have developed a little differently, but generally speaking, it is a wonderful modern day take on the old school Volkswagen bus. It looks cool, it drives well, it's got a lot of cool quirky features like you'd want from a car like that. It was just great. It's just a shame that it's so expensive because I think that priced it out of the reach of a lot of people who would have really appreciated it. I think that car in the $50,000 range would have been cool, but where it came in at like 70, it's an expensive kind of meme car. Number 3 runner-up for Car of the Year, the Tesla Cybertruck. This is going to get some hate from the car enthusiasts, but you got to hand it to Tesla. Nothing created a bigger buzz this year. And honestly, it's a pretty impressive overall vehicle. It has become clear that the type of people who drive these vehicles is an interesting set. However, just taken as a whole, it's very capable, it looks crazy, it turned heads, it really did everything it set out to do, and honestly, I think it does a pretty good job at just being an electric truck, even though it looks like it should be so compromised. I was impressed with it, I liked how it drove, I liked driving around in it. I think it's crazy. It still turns my head when I see them on the street, even though I see 5 or 6 a day here in Southern California. Is a huge vehicle that hit literally, that created a huge splash. And I think it was very, very impressive. Okay, next up, number 3 runner-up for Car of the Year. This one is one of the more expensive. I usually stick Car of the Year to something that is more affordable, but this car absolutely deserves to be mentioned. It was amazing. The new Lamborghini Revuelto. This is a fantastic continuation of the line of top-range Lamborghini models that started with the Miura and the Countach back in the day and still continues to now with mid-engine V12, big power, crazy styling. The Revuelto was a fantastic car. It blows the SF90, Ferrari SF90 out of the water in terms of its styling, its presence, its weird, cool party tricks. It's tremendously expensive, and that makes it a tough sell for Car of the Year, but as supercars go, and as they're getting more electric and less compelling and less emotional, I think the Revuelto still delivers a fantastic emotion and compellingness for buying it. It is a really, really cool car. Number 2, so second place, first runner-up for Car of the Year. Almost won the award, but number 2, the new Mercedes-Benz G580. The new G580, what a car. This is the new electric G-Wagon, and I think that for the very first time, I have driven an electric car that I really, really feel tremendously positive, no faults about it being, like, it was just a great car. And they did a great job of electrifying an icon. They took a car that is notoriously iconic, the G-Wagon, and instead of screwing with it, which they could have done, and made like a G-Wagon, but like with futuristic styling touches, they just made an electric G-Wagon, and they did a great job with it. And I think it's going to do great with a lot of the G-Wagon market, which is a lot of people who are kind of higher profile people who don't want to drive a gas guzzler, but they just want that cool, boxy, upright thing. Well, now they have the opportunity to drive a fully electric version of it that was done well. It feels just as sturdy and tough and strong as a regular G-Wagon. It accelerates like a high-performance G-Wagon, like a G63. The tech is all good, the interior is great, and it can do the tank turn. The G580 is a really, really impressive effort at an electric car. But it is not my winner for car of the year. It finishes second to my ultimate 2024 car of the year, and that would be the new Volvo EX90, which I just reviewed, the EX90. This is a full-size, 3-row luxury electric SUV. And one of the things that hit me about this car is this is the first time that I have ever had an experience where I think I would buy it regardless of the fact that it's electric. Like other electric cars, you're like, oh, if I had to get an EV, I would get blah, blah, blah. EX90 is like, if I was getting a luxury SUV, I would get an EX90. And yeah, it happens to be electric. It's just a tremendously well done car. It looks great on the outside. The technology is fantastic, particularly when Volvo gets that LiDAR stuff going, not ready yet. It drives well. It's not particularly exciting to drive, but it drives perfectly for a 3-row luxury electric SUV. It is just like kind of the perfect kid hauler around town car if you're willing to spend 80 grand on such a vehicle. But 80 grand is not totally out of the realm when an XC90 is, already a 60, 65 base car. The EX90 is just that much better. It has great performance for what it is. It has great technology. It's just a tremendously good, well-rounded, excellent vehicle. My only complaint about that car is I wish that it had a rear view camera instead of a rear view mirror. So many cars have switched to rear view cameras where the mirror is, and Volvo's all about safety. You'd think they would have done that, but they didn't. But there's a lot of other really clever touches in that car, really cool stuff that they came up with, and it's just great. It's just like a really great, excellently well done 3-row SUV, apart from the fact that it's electric, which it is, which also adds to the appeal to some extent, that you don't have to worry about fueling it and fuel economy, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I really think it was a really, really excellent smash hit of a car. It took Volvo forever to get it to market, but it's here now and it's excellent. So now that that's out of the way, next we move on to the top 10 quirks of the year. Of course, my videos are known for going through all the quirks and features of the cars. And when you review 2 cars a week for a whole year, 100 plus cars, that means you're going to find in those 100 videos some really weird quirks. And you can see on the screen, some of the top quirks from years past. But I'm going to do a top 10 list, and I'll give you the number 1 quirk at the end. But it's always interesting to see how quirky automakers can quirk their cars. So, top 10 quirks. Starting with quirk number 10. That would be the Aston Martin Virage pen. The Aston Martin Virage was a car that was kind of unexceptional and came out 12 years ago. In the interior, near the volume buttons and the climate controls, there's a little knob, and if you push on it, a pen pops out. They integrated a pen into the center control stack, an Aston Martin specific pen designed to go with this car. The Aston Martin Virage pen. It's actually a pretty good idea. People wish they had pens in their cars all the time, but the Aston Martin Virage had an integrated pen. The only car I've ever seen that has that, and that was it. Next up, number 9 quirkiest quirk of the year, also in the Aston Martin realm, the DBAR1 parking top. So the Aston Martin DBAR1 was a very limited production, roofless Aston Martin model in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And because there was no real roof situation in the car, that came with a parking top that if you had it parked and you were worried it might rain, you would put the parking top over the car to cover up the interior. You couldn't drive with the parking top on because it covered the windshield. But it was this ridiculous parking top made for like you're showing the car on the concours lawn, and if it starts to mist, the parking top might protect you from the mist. And so that was a ridiculous feature that car had. Absolutely loved it. And that car in general had some just wonderful quirks, but that was King Quirk. Speaking of roofs, my number 8 top quirk of the year is the Porsche 718 Spider RS roof, which was absolutely absurd. This is the ultra high performance version of the Porsche Boxster. I drove it this year. It was a great car, amazing to drive, fantastic dynamically, a really, really special car. The roof is absolutely insane. And I devoted like 6 minutes in the 30-minute video just to trying to show people how to put on the roof, which is not a realistic proposition for most people unless they have some real time on their hands. Totally ridiculous tinker toy roof solution, but it kind of fit the car. It's supposed to be enjoyed as an open roof vehicle. The roof they have is a secondary thing that you can use occasionally if you need it. And boy, did they make that clear by how hard it was to use. Next up, number 7, top quirk of the year. The stripe on the Dodge Viper ACR, which goes all the way down the car and even includes the steering wheel. You do not see a lot of vehicle stripes that go down the entire bodywork and cover the steering wheel included in the stripe, but that's what they did for the Viper ACR. It was a clever bit of striping in that car, and it's hilarious that they got the stripe to work even on the steering wheel, and I love to see it. And it's a very subtle quirk. You might not even realize that they did it, but they did do it, and it is a fantastic touch in that car. Okay, next up, number 6, top quirk of the year, the new Hyundai Ioniq 5N shifting. So, the Hyundai Ioniq 5N is a fully electric car, but Hyundai figured out some way to make it feel like it's shifting. And I gotta tell you, it was a fantastic sensation. It was a tremendously well done feature in that car. You're driving along, you pull the paddle, and it feels like the power cuts out for a second. You go down in the rev range and come back up. And there's people out there who are like, that's fake. Porsche said this. They're like, why would we do that? It just makes the car slower. Yeah, but it makes the car more engaging. And I gotta tell you, I've been anxious about the future of car enthusiasty electric cars for a lot of reasons until I drove the Ioniq 5N with its shifting. And it was absolutely a wonderful experience shifting gears in that car. It really gave it kind of a car enthusiast feel that I feel like is missing from a lot of EVs. It really felt like you were shifting gears in a car. And I think a manual transmission in an electric car would be really cool, but if you can't give us that, electric shifting is a really, really cool feature. And it's funny that Hyundai figured out how to bring some car enthusiasm back into the electric car, and other manufacturers have not gone down that road. I suspect they will. It just is too much fun to ignore. Okay, next up, up to our top 5 quirks of the year. Number 5, this is a recent one, the MG Cyberster and its retro-themed items. So for those of you who don't, MG was a British company for like 90 years, and then they went bankrupt, as all the British automakers eventually did. They either went bankrupt or had to go into a controlling hands of a different car company in a different country. And MG went to the Chinese, and so they came out with this convertible roadster, which I just reviewed, called the Cyberster, and there's all these retro touches on the car commemorating the heritage of this brand that is no longer British, that no longer builds gas-powered cars. Like an electric Chinese car brand is commemorating the heritage that it doesn't really have. And so it was like a 100th anniversary. It was like printed on the car, celebrating the 100th anniversary of MG, skipping the fact that they haven't really existed for the last 15 years and they went into Chinese hands. But I especially love that the key fob was in the shape of this like historical MG race car, and the fob itself kind of bragged about this car like it's part of MG's history, even though the Chinese version of MG has no history. It was just a hilarious thing to try to bring back some heritage into the MG of a completely different MG than back. It almost feels more like a slap in the face, like ridiculous pandering than actual heritage. And it's kind of funny to see the Chinese MG owners try to stumble their way through the heritage of this storied British brand. It was really hilarious. Next up, the number 4 top quirk of the year. That would be the Dodge Demon drink set. This was a ridiculous thing. In the back of the Dodge Demon that I reviewed, the owner of the car had left the case that you get when you buy one, and it included like a decanter and a carafe and all this stuff for drinking, which is an odd thing to mix with a high-performance car to begin with. But it had like an embossed demon head, and the VIN of the individual car was printed on all this stuff, and it was a just totally over-the-top accessory that was included in all the Demon 170 models, I should say, Demon 170. And like a truly very weird and special and interesting quirk that really made that car seem particularly exciting and added to the overall aura of just how special the car was. Next up, number 3 quirk of the year. We're down to the top 3, and the number 3 quirk is the design of the Tesla Cybertruck. I couldn't mention the top quirks of the year without talking about this. The Cybertruck is so insane looking and so ridiculous and crazy and absurd in every way. You just gotta give it to him. It is king quirk. And the interesting thing about the Cybertruck that I found is it doesn't actually have that many particular quirks about it once you're using it. There's some weird stuff, like the design creates some unusual things that happen, and the steering is definitely unusual, but The design is unquestionably the most quirky thing about that vehicle, and one of the most quirky things about any vehicle, certainly of this year, and generally overall, especially new cars. Just a totally bizarre, crazy thing. And when I see them on the road, it is still astonishing to me that they managed to pull it off. But we are down to the top 2 quirks of the year. Let's do it. The number 2 quirk of the year, the Lamborghini Revuelto taillights that are in the shape of a bull. This is an absolutely brilliant piece of tremendously subtle design. But the fact that the taillights actually make the shape of a bull head in the back of the car, if you look at it from just the right angle, when the brake lights are on, like, it has to be perfect. But if you do, you can see that they integrated the bull, the symbol of the Lamborghini brand, into the taillights of the car. It is just a masterclass in subtle quirksmanship. And I love that Lamborghini did that for that car. It's almost like they created it just for me to talk about in my videos, the Lamborghini Revuelto bull taillight. But that is not our number 1 quirk of the year. The number 1 quirk of the year, and honestly, this was easy when I was doing this list. The number 1 quirk of the year goes to the Mercedes-Benz G580 and its tank turn. And you can see it here. The G580 will just rotate around and around and around and around. The thing that should always win the top quirk is something that would make even a non-car enthusiast excited. And I got a whiff of that firsthand when I was filming the G580. I was filming it in a private area in a public park. And a guy from the parks department came up and he said, "Oh, you're good. You can keep shooting, just leave in a little bit." And I was like, "Yeah, great." And so I finished up kind of, and then I had to do the tank turn outside. I couldn't do it here in the office. And I do the tank turn, and the guy's still over there, and he is jaw dropped. And he walks over, and I thought he was going to be like, "You're messing up the park." And he goes, "You got to do that again, man. You got to do that again. I got to see that again." So I do it for him again. He's on the phone. He's like, "I got to call you back. There's some stuff going on. I got to call you back." And he was just so excited. And actually, you can see him in the video. If you pause it, he's watching and I think filming the car going around and around because he was so excited to see it. And the G580 tank turn, unlike the previous top quirks of the year, those were all insane, and I'm not sure that they'll ever be replicated in other cars. The G580 tank turn, I have a suspicion other EVs will do in the future. It's not tremendously easy to engineer, is my understanding, but it's also not too difficult when you have individual motors, and my understanding is that Rivian is going to try to do it for the R1S coming up. So it may not be all that special of a quirk in 5 years or 10 years when so many cars go electric, but for now, it is unquestionably the quirkiest, craziest, most ridiculous quirk, undoubtedly, of the whole year of any car I reviewed. And it was absolutely wonderful to do it, to see it done, and to be able to experience it. Truly an unbelievable ridiculousness of a quirk, the G580 tank turn. So, there you go. Long video, like I said, but it's the Doug of the Year Awards. They're important. This is an important video. We give out all of the big awards, and we've given them out. And so those were all the important cars. It's an 8-year tradition now. We've awarded some great cars in the past, and I look forward to all upcoming Doug of the Year awards. And like always, at the end of this video, I have to thank everybody for watching. I sincerely appreciate. We got millions and millions of views this year. I crossed the 2 billion lifetime view mark, which is unbelievable. Coming up on 5 million subscribers. It's amazing to think about. It's amazing to experience. And I am so thrilled that you've been along on my crazy journey reviewing all these hundreds of cars and all of their quirks and features. So thank you for watching, and thanks especially for watching the Doug Awards.